Very good morning from India. It is my privilege to welcome all to this World Universities Summit on Universities of the Future, Building Institutional Resilience, Social Responsibility and Community Impact in G20 countries. I'm especially honored and thrilled to be part of this distinguished panel to discuss on the theme, Breaking the Glass Ceiling, Universities Promoting Equality and Nurturing Future Women Leaders. I have the privilege today of interacting with an eminent group of panelists on this theme. Let me quickly introduce our panelists for this session. I have with us Professor Dr. M. Sondan Feyiz, Rector, Kadir University, Turkey. Professor Dr. Galina Rousseva Sokolova, Professor, Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, OP Jindal Global University. Professor Dr. Tanushree Sharma, Professor, Jindal Global Business School, OP Jindal Global University. Professor Dr. Penny Werthner. She is the Interim Provost and Vice President, Academics, University of Calgary, Canada. My name is Professor Dr. Upasana Mahanta. I'm the Dean of Admissions and Outreach at OP Jindal Global University. I welcome all the panelists and I look forward to this discussion with all of you. I want to take a brief moment to introduce today's topic and share a few brief points on the theme. Now, the metaphor of the glass ceiling, it refers to an invisible barrier or a set of barriers that prevent women or other marginalized groups for advancing to top leadership positions within an organization or an industry. The term was first popularized around 1980s, and it is often used to describe the structural and cultural barriers that prevent women from advancing to high-level positions, whether it is in business or government or academia or any other fields. Now, this glass ceiling is often the result of systemic and structural discrimination, bias, stereotyping, which can limit opportunities that come women's way, whether it is for advancement, despite them having the requisite qualifications or despite them having the requisite performance at the workplace. It is not always necessarily a deliberate form of discrimination. It can be a manifestation of a subconscious or unconscious bias and prejudices that already exist. Now, this glass ceiling can take many forms. It could be unequal pay, it could be limited access to promotional opportunities, it could be lack of mentorship or sponsorship, it could be exclusion from important decision-making processes. It can also be manifesting in terms of lack of diversity at the highest levels of organizations. It can lead to a narrow range of perspectives and ideas because there is a lack of diversity at the highest levels of organizations. So how to break through this glass ceiling? And women have successfully broken through these glass ceilings in various fields, including academia. But it requires a concerted effort to challenge and change systemic biases, practices. It requires us to promote diversity and inclusion. It requires us to create opportunities for women to advance to leadership position. In India, if I can talk about India, we can see in the past a decade or so, the number of women who have enrolled in institution of higher education to get in higher education, that has been steadily increasing. But women who have gone into paid employment, the number of them have been steadily falling. And often women cite reasons like family responsibilities, lack of flexible work hours, lack of creche facilities as reasons for falling out of paid employment. Now, universities can promote equality. It can ensure equal representation of women in leadership positions within universities. It can address issues of gender pay gap. It can work towards providing equal opportunities for promotions, for career advancements, regardless of gender. And universities can actually work towards creating a supportive environment for women. So this breaking the glass ceiling, the theme of today's conversation, it's not only a conversation about empowering women. It's about creating a more diverse and a more inclusive university community. So in this context, it will be really exciting to be talking to all my esteemed panelists today to understand their views on the glass ceiling and what role they see universities playing in nurturing and promoting women's leadership in the context of universities. I also want to highlight that this is not the only form of marginalization that exists in the context of higher education institution or any other form of organizations. There are other kinds of exclusions and marginalizations that various other social groups face. But today, we are particularly talking about the barriers, the glass ceiling faced by women, and what can universities do to address that situation. So I will keep my comments brief because we want to hear from all our esteemed panelists. I would request all our panelists to comment on the theme, reflect their thoughts and ideas, and within say 3 to 4 minutes, so that we have enough time to reflect on a few questions that we have, and also to take on audience question. With that, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Feyiz to briefly reflect on her thoughts and insights about the theme at hand. Professor Dr. Feyiz, over to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to take a look at this problem from the perspective of our university, and I want to give you some numbers. When you look at the numbers, the percentage in assistant female faculty member in assistant professor is 58%. And when you look at the associate professorship, it's 54%. When you look at the full professorship, it's 35%. And what you see here, we are just 25 years old university. We had enough number of years to increase the number of female professors at Kadir University, but something happens along the way. We lost female academics along the way. Why? The real question is it because they really want to give up? And I don't see, there is a problem there, but still it's okay if it's their own decision. Or is it because they are forced to give up? If we would like to increase the number of, administrative women in the academia, we have to first increase the number of women in full professorship, because unless you are a full professor, you're not going to appoint it as the president or rector, vice rector, or dean or vice dean. So this is the real problem. So why we are losing women along the way? I mean, the pipeline is really good. I'm sure it's the same in many countries, in Eastern and Western countries. When you look at the number of graduate at undergraduate level, it's more or less the same. And at the starting, we are the same, but along the way, we are losing. Is it family? And if that is the sum, there are two problems. There are two things we can do, internal and external things. Internal, as women, we have to do our fighting in the family. It's not just the responsibility of women to keep the family together. When you look at this, 58% of assistant professors at Kadir are women. This is the time where they form their family. And then my next question is it just the responsibility of women to keep the family together? Or is just, and second thing, it is just the responsibility of women to raise a child? Here, these are the problems. External things, the institutional, as at Kadir University, there were things we could do. Number one is changing policies to provide the necessary support for the women, and also put some limitation, keeping the same academic position. And this is what we did. And my personal view, and to have the promotion for the academic administrative positions, we have to really be excellent in our own field. And that makes us a strong candidate for a leadership in academia, and to organize or to develop a supportive system. Every country and every institution should find their own ways to do that. And I will stop here, and then I will have the opportunity to answer the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Feyiz. And you actually pointed out three very important things in my understanding. One is how, it sort of filters down as you go to the top. So you have a high number of assistant professors and associate professor, but as you keep going up the ladder, the number of presence of women goes down. And the two other important things that you pointed out is the internal as well as the external barriers. So perhaps the internal one also are deeply rooted in this systemic structural understandings of women's role to be primarily within the household. Women taking the majority of the burden when it comes to childcare or elderly care, or taking care of other household responsibilities. And unless that kind of mindset is not challenged, perhaps only challenging the external conditionalities will not help. And of course, in the context of the external barriers, one would have to look at institutional mechanisms and the support environment that is provided for women to be able to grow as leaders. So thank you very much for those wonderful, insightful points that you have raised. I would now like to go to my colleague, Professor Galina. Kindly, Professor Galina, please share your thoughts and reflections on the theme.
Thank you, Upasana. It's so nice to see all of you today and to be able to talk about this problem, which of course we have all thought about in one way or the other, being academic, women in academia, all of us. Now, I guess that we will repeat ourselves. I mean, the main points are already there, thanks to Professor Upasana's introductory remarks and also Professor Feyiz. So I will more or less take on the same points, perhaps from a slightly different perspective, though I'm not even sure about that. But the first thing that comes to my mind when we are talking about glass ceilings is that, well, they're made of glass. So we will be talking today, and we are talking in general across universities about policies, but these policies are fighting something which is essentially invisible, something which is part of the culture, and something which consist in ideas about realities that we carry in our heads, and things in our heads are those that takes the most time to change, and that I think is an essential element here when talking about the glass ceiling. Part of it is that, well, women also carry those ideas in their heads. So women tend to internalize the problem. They absorb it along with the other elements of their culture. So, and that creates an internal barrier as well as all the other external barriers that we are talking about. Now, from my experience, the glass ceiling in academia depends first on the field, because in STEM, there are much less female academics in general than in social sciences or humanities. So that is one thing. And it also depends on the positions, the hierarchy of the university. There are few women deans and even less female presidents of universities. So, of course, that can be one line of thinking would be some measures that can be qualified as some sort of positive discrimination, quotas, leadership programs. But coming back to the fact that the ceiling is invisible, I'm also a bit not skeptical, but we have to be very much aware, because as in certain companies there can be greenwashing can be integrated as a marketing strategy. So I believe the same can be told about gender washing. By creating leadership programs for women, etc., we kind of push the problem aside, we present things. But again, the most important thing here is that attitudes, ways of thinking have to change. And that unfortunately doesn't come with policy decisions. Now, if we think about the glass ceiling in academia compared to other sectors, I would say that the pay gap is generally less of a problem because universities have structures and the payroll is structured accordingly. What is more of a problem is that a career in academia demands a long-term commitment, and as Professor Feyiz already pointed out, women, for one reason or another, may need to take breaks from it, and that doesn't fit well. So, of course, maternal leaves and childcare facilities are of the utmost importance here. But at the same time, I'm sharing here my experience in Bulgaria. I think this is valid also for Eastern Europe because, well, I'm from Bulgaria and I have worked for many years at Sofia University. In Bulgaria, we've had excellent maternal leaves, 2 years altogether, and childcare facilities, and still there were very few women in leadership positions in the university because it's an accumulation of problems, part of which, of course, are a matter of policy decisions, but part of them are actually, we don't even know. It can be tricky to single out where they are exactly. Anyway, they are invisible, right? So that is, so these are two things about academia compared to other sectors. And then there is also the hierarchy, the institutional hierarchy of universities, and that goes mostly for old public universities. So it's not so much about Kadir Has, and it's not so much OP Jindal Global University, but the old universities in Europe have this rigid and well-established, it's a matter of tradition always, but a structure in which functions a little bit like in the army. You raise in the ranks only through seniority, through, of course, individual achievement, and there's a lot of competition. So that sort of structure is also not very friendly to female advancement. Now, the good thing is that these things are changing, although slowly, and as Professor Feyiz said, we are losing women along the way, so we have to figure out how this should be, or at least to diminish the loss of women. But things are changing in a positive direction, and I will end my introductory remarks with this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Galina, for those insightful comments. And I want to highlight a couple of things that you said, and you are absolutely right. And Professor Feyiz also alluded to this, that we are losing women and we need to urgently do something to address the situation. But perhaps what you pointed out, and it's very important to understand that this glass ceiling that we are all talking about is invisible. And the invisible, the idea of invisibility also highlights the fact that it is then often not recognized as a challenge. So many of the things, for example, you spoke about gender pay gap, which could be recognized and called out and addressed. But there are so many of it that has been deeply internalized. Both in the context of the institution and also in the context of the home that we often fail to recognize. And the example that you gave of having institutional systems of childcare facilities and policies in place in Bulgaria, but yet the number of women coming into leadership positions not matching what it should be with the presence of these policies. So perhaps policy making is not the only answer. And perhaps we have to think about what could be then the potential answer to these women falling out of the paid workforce, and particularly in the context of academia. And somehow, and I feel, and I would love to hear the thoughts of my esteemed panelists on this, is that often the conversation has become that, women need this. Women are falling out. Women need to be supported to do this, but somehow we are perhaps not putting enough stress on the conversation that not only women need this, society need this, human development need this, economies need this. So it's not that women need this alone, and it is only for women that all of us will have to come together and do this. It is all of us need it. Women falling out of paid employment, women falling out of leadership positions, women not being part of top positions in academia or any other organization is not only a women's problem. And often it gets sort of placed as a women's problem, where women will gather and talk about this problem and think about ways to address it. And perhaps that is something we really need to reflect on. With that, I would like to come to Professor Penny Werthner. Professor, if you would like to share your initial reflections on the theme.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll say good evening because it's evening here, but lovely to meet all of you and whoever's online. I'll take a little bit of a different tack just for a quick moment, because I grew up first in sport. And of course, sport is one of the last bastions of male dominance, even more so than many things. But I grew up in the beginning, questioning why I couldn't run distances that men could run. And so, thinking about how it was not equitable in sport and remains that way. And then, of course, moving into graduate school and then education, and then as a professor and a dean and so on, and really questioning how the system works. And at the same time of being in academia, we were also a number of women colleagues were also, and I'm bringing this back because to talk about developing women as leaders, because we thought it would be too difficult to change the system. And so we wanted to develop all the skills of women leaders and thought that would work. And did we help lots of women develop great skills to be good leaders? I think we did, but then they would go back into the system that didn't really welcome them in many ways or held them down. And I did love, if I could say, Galina, thinking of how that the glass ceiling is invisible, or I might say very hard to see, and yet there it is that exists. And so, one of the models that we've used a lot is Nicole Lavoie's intersectional model, where it's looking at, you look at the individual, which of course is what we did for a number of years of trying to develop those skills, but then realize that, well, that's good individually, it didn't change the system. And so it's understanding all the different contexts that I think we need to consider as women to succeed in academia. And I think, you brought up, Upasana, about, I think we talk lots about role models and needing to see women in positions, and that you can believe and have the confidence to be something if you see women in those positions. And so again, not a fan of the role model so much, that concept, because I think it gets misused. But I know that when I came in as dean of our faculty of kinesiology, there had never been a woman dean there before, as we well know across, all our universities, I'm sure. And I think women that then worked in the faculty started to think, well, I could do that, right? If Penny can do that, then I can do that. So I think there is something to be said about that. And of course, I'm just sort of throwing out a few thoughts, because I think probably at all our universities, perhaps in one way or the other, we have developed, areas of equity, diversity, inclusion, because we're getting much better at making that argument. Again, coming back to your comment, Upasana, about, diversity will bring greater voices to the table. And it will make us all better, and making those arguments and continuing to make them. But I absolutely still believe that that ceiling, whether it's glass or cement, sometimes it seems like it's cement, still very much exists for women. And so continuing to work to change the system, and at the same time still give young women the skills to understand how to, confront what is going on without being attacked, or then, failing because they're seen to be aggressive. Because of course, when we as women, I think, are assertive, we are often seen as aggressive because we're standing up and speaking out. And I think that works against us. And so I, in my leadership positions, constantly, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but constantly being aware of how to interact and be strong with the majority of individuals that I work with that are men, so that they will listen and I will be able to make changes. So again, it doesn't mean not standing up and being clear, but also not trying to create conflict unless it's absolutely necessary, because conflict always closes down the conversation if we really want to make change. And, I guess also gathering women around us to try to work together to change something and support each other in these roles. I am a psychologist, so I'm talking more from that perspective. But I think it's one of the things that I've always tried to do. I mean, I had a great deal of support. I think it's a significant, primarily from women, definitely some men, certainly as I was finishing my PhD, a very supportive male, but mostly women who supported me. And so really try to do the same for younger women to I guess I will say educate them on it's not going to be an easy road, because I really think every time we take a step forward, it's almost like it's 2 steps back. That's a little negative perhaps, but it's definitely not a smooth road. But I think, the model of understanding that this is complex, there's individual pieces, there's organizational pieces, there's the system and world that we live in, and each of us live in a bit of a different world, and yet in some ways it's very similar. Maybe I'll stop there for the moment, and I'm looking forward to the greater conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Penny. Very, very significant points. And of course, to highlight the complexity of the issue itself, that it is not, it has to be understood as a complex problem. But I really am very intrigued by the point of role model and solidarity that you spoke about. And I think these are 2 new points that we're throwing into the conversation. If I can take a moment, I often used to feel sometimes, being the only woman in a panel, or sometimes, being the only woman in a room talking about something because, you have a leadership position in some small way. I used to often think, should I resent this? Should I get upset about this, that I'm the only woman? Is it adding women and stirring? Or should I take this platform and make a case for more women coming into the fold of leadership, or more women being part of this room? And I have often found the latter position to be more constructive. For me personally, as an inspiring position to take, a motivating position to take, and for others to be able to think that that is something that one can do in a situation like this. And of course, the point about solidarity, I think that is not talked about enough. The women supporting women, and that there is, it's not in a very parochial way, but there is tremendous power, I think, in solidarity, and we must give due importance, significance to it, and talk more about it. So thank you very much for that. Now I have the pleasure to invite my colleague, Professor Tanushree Sharma, to please share her reflections on the theme.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Mahanta. Hello, everyone who's here and all at the other side of the Zoom screen. Thank you very much for your insightful thoughts on this theme. I really like, what Professor Penny has said about getting lots of support from female colleagues, which one does not get to hear that often. People generally talk about this queen bee syndrome, where generally the rivalry among female colleagues is highlighted. So I would now like to present my view on this theme. Yes, lack of diversity and gender equality is a fact. Glass ceiling in the upper echelon of organizational leadership is a reality. The gendered realities of higher education are particularly troublesome or worrisome, given that so many studies have repeatedly presented a compelling case for advancing more women into leadership positions. I mean, just like any other organization, higher educational institutions benefit immensely when women assume leadership roles. The organizational cultural fabric gets strengthened. Collective intelligence takes a boost. Innovation, they say, increases. There is increase in talent retention. There's so many benefits of having more women representation in senior leadership position, including enhanced reputation of the organization and increased corporate social responsibilities. And I think the COVID pandemic also has highlighted the need for a different kind of leadership, which is more feminine in nature, which is more collaborative, relationship, and developmental in orientation. So these are some of the similarities between any higher education institutions and any other organizations for that matter. But unlike other organizations, the presence or absence of women academic leaders have a far-reaching repercussions, one would like to say, not only for the institution itself, but beyond themselves. Far beyond from them, I mean, they hold a very critical, an important role in shaping our societies. So they need to act more of an exemplar to the rest of the society or the community. So the leadership choices have the potential of influencing society as a whole. This point is what perhaps Professor Mahanta also highlighted while reflecting on one of the panelists' reflections. So the women academic leaders serves as role models, mentors, and coach to younger women in the universities, the students who are kind of about to embark on their own leadership journeys. So thus they can serve to bring out the best among these young women of not only the present generation, but many more generations to come. So thousands of students get enrolled in higher education institutions annually. They start their academic sojourn with their previously held beliefs, biases, stereotypes, self-doubts, which are formed over a period of time as they grow up from, largely as a result of their experiences, encounters, and exposures. Now, it's for higher education institutions to make them reflect and question their biases and beliefs, especially related to gender stereotypes or gender inequality. If what they see in the institution is only what happens in society at large, instead of those beliefs and biases getting redirected, they get reinforced. They get more strengthened rather than getting shattered. Therefore, it really becomes very, very important for higher education to see that they actually demonstrate, they exemplify good gender practices, good gender behavior, right? It's only when students see these things happening in the places like higher educations, they are forced, they're compelled to at least think about the stereotypes, the biases which they carry. Otherwise, they go back to the world with their previously held beliefs and biases further reinforced. So I think for both symbolic and perhaps substantive reasons, right? Higher education must be at the forefront of advocacy for greater women's representation in organizational leadership, right? So what perhaps they need to do is they need to identify and address the barriers and the challenges that prevent women leaders emerging and executing the responsibilities well. So we all have spoken about different barriers and challenges, and that they operate at different levels. You know, they are macro, meso, and macro. Macro at the societal level, meso at the organizational level, and micro at the individual levels. People do talk a lot about, their own image, which they absorb from society. The imposter syndrome, the unconscious bias, they're feeling a sense of inadequacy perhaps. But there is one more barrier, which is all the more important, which unfortunately is not given enough importance. And that is related to how women are. What I'm talking about is the barrier, which despite being a prominent or a significant source of gendered inequalities at work, is not often discussed. It's blood work. It is considered either a taboo or uncivil topic to be openly discussed. It is generally not considered a fit topic for any public discourse. This topic merits a mention here for the age when women are actually ready to assume leadership positions coincides with the change of the life, that is menopausal transition. The higher education institutions must take the responsibility for creating accessible and equal workplaces that accommodate such problems of employees. Women are different. Workplaces have been conceptualized keeping in mind only men. Women are different. Their being different is not a disease. It's very natural. If workplaces are conceptualized keeping in mind only 50% of the world population, completely disregarding the remaining 50%, of which close to 40% they say go to higher education institutions, and out of that only less than 20 or maybe at times less than 10% assume the leadership position, can we actually lose those very few potential female leaders, women academic leaders, to the change of life, menopausal transition? this is one more point that we must seriously debate and deliberate on. So with this, I would like to conclude my opening remarks. Thank you very much. Over to you, Upasana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tanushree. And I think you've introduced something very, very significant and actually an urgent conversation that is required in the context of women and not only higher education institutions, actually in any kind of organizational or institutional setting. And you're absolutely right. We are deeply uncomfortable talking about the body. We are deeply uncomfortable taking ownership of the body. We often think that anything related to the body, whether it is menstruation or menopause, need to be talked in hushed tones. Organizations and institutions, especially when it is largely men in positions of power, authority, and leadership, find it extremely uncomfortable to talk about it. The only thing that we talk about in the context of organizations and institutions is maternity leave, because that is a safe space. One can talk about maternity leave. We get deeply uncomfortable again if we talk about paternity leave and parental leave, and that is one conversation that one again is not very comfortable having in the context of many institutions. So I'm very grateful to you for introducing that into this conversation, and I think that this is something that we must talk about, and the fact that this is not a weakness, that this is a body reality that must be accounted for in our organizational and institutional policies and imagination. The second important thing that you talk about is to look at what kind of leadership and leadership values that we want to bring together. And increasingly, Professor Tanushree, I know you work on organizational behavior. Professor Penny talked about, coming from the field of psychology and others. And I increasingly find that in the context of organization, with my limited knowledge, increasingly we are talking about emotional intelligence. We are talking about listening. We are talking about empathy. Qualities of leadership that were once sort of pushed aside as too feminine. Women are emotional and women are busy listening, but now we are talking about as a key integral part of organization and institutional culture and behavior. So perhaps that is something, again, we can take up for conversation. So with that, I want to throw my first key question at you. Many of the things that we thought we will discuss in terms of questions have already been addressed. So I don't want to repeat those. So perhaps, Professor Tanushree, what you left off with, you spoke about higher education institutions exemplifying good practices. You spoke about the fact that this not only is for the institution, but what the students and those who are part of these institutions as learners imbibe and take to the outside world. So what could be some of these possible good practices? We spoke about the glass ceiling, we spoke about the need to break it, we highlighted the challenges, but if we have to talk about concrete steps that institutions of higher education can take in terms of these good practices, what could they possibly be? Again, I would want to go and start with Professor Feyiz, brief comments about what do you think some of the key immediate steps that can be taken by universities at this point of time to respond to this challenge. Professor Feyiz.
Okay, thank you. The first thing that came to my mind is that first, we are scientists. We can be in different fields, but we are scientists. As a scientist, if we have well-defined pathway, okay, to climb the ladder, that will naturally fix the problem. The first thing, this is what I did at Kadir University. When I became the president of the university, I had several female faculty members who came and complained about the gender pay gap and also unfair treatment of the upper administrations And what I realized is no matter if you are a man faculty member or female faculty member, if you do not have a well-defined pathway for a young scientist to climb up the ladder, then you will have the problem. So the immediate action that we can do is have well-defined pathway for young scientists to climb up the ladder. Second thing, if you have the financial support to support the women faculty, although, we are complaining about why it is just only our job to, to raise the child. And then we are talking about, okay, we have to have a daycare facilities to take care of the child of women faculty members. If you have the financial support system to build up the care system. Second thing, to comment on what Penny said, yes, there's a big problem to be, for role model. Sometimes it might be misused, but, yesterday I went and visited 2 high schools, okay? And I was a kind of a role model for these young female, let's say, students, because they didn't see anyone before as the rector of a university and an academic person. I'm a physics professor. My background is physics. And even, number of female professors in physics is really, really low compared to the other countries. In Turkey is much better. But what they said, seeing you as the, academician in the university, now I set my mind to become an academic person and I will work hard. So we can be good role models if we find a way to make it work, okay, correctly. Second, as I said, really, this is the key in the university institutionally, have well-defined pathway, and you have to be fair enough for all faculty members. And that will fix the problem naturally. And I see it. What I saw, Upasana, I talk to our women faculty members, but they say, I want to stay as assistant professor. I said, no, you have no such an option. You have to have associate professor and full professor. You don't have such an option under my administration. That's why I put a limit on number of years you can stay in one position. And I also set up the supporting mechanism. I said, okay, you may not know how to write research proposal. You may need help to do research. We will do that. We will provide all the supporting system. So what we did, we set up a research and development resource director, under which we had experts who are ready to help our faculty member. We don't make any difference on the gender. Faculty member in writing their research proposal, in finding new research funding agencies, and or in managing their research proposals. So you just provide what I said, we will provide the support, and you have to take the step to become associate professor and full professor, so that we will have a large pool of female faculty members who can be appointed for this upper administrative positions. So support the faculty members, set up the supporting mechanism. Research is the key. If our women faculty members are strong in their field, then they will have the courage. Look, I will give you one example. When I got the offer, before I become president here at Kadir, I was vice president at Sabancı University. I was just associate professor at one of the public universities and got a phone call and got the offer. You know what my reaction was? Are you sure you want to pick me as your vice president? Can you imagine? Why? Because my dream was to become a scientist. I never had the dream of become, administrative, having an administrative position. And I didn't have any experience. as the head of department or vice dean or vice head. No. So the second thing that can easily be done, this is what I did at Kadir University. You have to have this experience. One point in your life, you will have this administrative duty, okay? So in all committee, I want 50% representation of female faculty members. Second, and 2/3 of our head of departments are female. So once you gain an experience, and then they will automatically feel that, oh, I can do it. You don't need to become different. You just have the gut to have this position. So let them gain this experience, and then we will see more women in the upper administration of the higher education institution in each country.
Thank you, Professor Feyiz. First of all, to bring in so much of positivity into this conversation and to be so hopeful about the future. And you spoke about having a well-defined pathway. And I feel that is a very important point to make, because then one is very clear in their mind, irrespective of their gender, as to how their growth looks like in the context of an institution, an organization, or an university, and of course to have the other support mechanisms. And you brought out the importance of research support. And I think that is very, very important, especially for young academicians, young female academicians, to be able to get that support. So that is extremely, extremely important. Professor Galina, would you like to add to this and take the conversation forward?
Well, while I was listening to you, and since we are moving towards the end of this extremely interesting conversation, I was thinking that indeed, what is the most important thing at this point is, well, it's our students, especially our female students. And I agree very much with Professor Werthner about the importance of role models, and also Professor Feyiz spoke about that, but also in a more general way, we must allow our students to remain blissfully unaware of the glass ceiling. We must not permit them to internalize it as well, because if they are unaware, they will act as if it doesn't exist. And that will help the whole situation a lot. So it's very important how we address our students. And I know that it seems like, of course, we're treating boys and girls equally, but when I reflect back upon my own experience, it also seemed that way. But I also know that in subtle ways, there was a difference. Somehow in different people's eyes, I have seen this, oh, you're a pretty girl and you are that smart. That sort of attitude. So I think it's very important to have, again, our female students blissfully unaware of what we unfortunately know, and that will make the things in our head change a lot faster, on top of every policy measure that we can take, and Professor Feyiz was very explicit and articulate about it. So that's what I wanted to say at this point. Thank you, Upasana.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Galina. And I think the point that you make that, particularly in the context of institutions of higher education, perhaps nurturing female leadership is not only about, nurturing the faculty or the staff, but it is also about the students, because you're creating a future generation of leaders. So how do we address? One is, of course, through role models and good practices, but also how do we address this young generation who is looking at us, not only for role models, but also for context, for understanding, to be able to recognize biases and prejudices that may exist in their own lives, that they have internalized, and often 2 points. Actually, there are 2 audience questions, and because we do not have much time after this, I'm going to just throw it in. And perhaps Professor Penny and Professor Tanushree could also address it. One is the question of resilience. What kind of role does resilience play? Are women who are able to break through the glass ceiling are resilient and courageous women, and hence they're able to do it? Or 2 is the point that perhaps Professor Feyiz, you also alluded to, and Galina, you speak about when you speak about the internalization, is that, you know, do women end up having an imposter syndrome often? That I deserve this, or I got this, you know, because of an positive affirmative action policy, or am I here for, you know, because this one thought I'm good to be doing this, so I have to prove myself more, or I have to keep myself limited into certain boundaries because do I even, you know, deserve to be here? So are we constantly suffering from that sense of, you know, imposter syndrome? So these are few things, perhaps. Professor Penny, if I can invite you in to share your thoughts.
Well, I'll just say I am loving this conversation. I think we need to get together in person and do. I want to come back to. Oh, there's so many things I want to say, but I guess I'll just say one thing. I mean, first of all, I'm not a fan of labels. So the imposter syndrome, I mean, are we always confident at what we do? No, but I really don't like labels very much. I know they help us perhaps articulate something, but, you know, do all of us feel incredibly confident in the jobs that we're doing? I'm not sure we always do. And that's why we also need support as we move forward. And I think bringing up our female students is really important, but I'm going to come back, if I may, because I know we are running out of time, and I'll just make this one comment so that we have time for Tanushree here. But just Dr. Feyiz, on your comment of, you know, really telling those faculty members that, no, you can't stay at an assistant, you have to go to associate and you have to go to full, and in doing that, encouraging them to do that, because we know from some research that was done in terms of people that have excelled in all sorts of fields, and this isn't just gender related, but that someone had a belief in that they supported them in that, they believed they could be. And that's just such a great example of that, I think. Like, we could enable women to move. We still can't forget the system we're working in, for sure. But it is a piece. So I love the conversation we're having here. I think it's brilliant. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, so there's time for other comments.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do hope that a physical conversation is possible at some point, and we can really take it forward in terms of learnings from conversations like this. Professor Tanushree, I would like to invite you in, please.
Sure, thank you. I'm also loving this conversation to the hilt. I would like to reflect on resilience thing. Yes, resilience is extremely important. As I said, that we do have gendered realities in the organization. There would be many occasions when, despite putting your best foot forward, you may not be able to come up to the expectations which people have of you, and most importantly, your own, meeting your own expectations. There is one more thing when we talk about glass ceiling, that is glass cliff realities, wherein at times women are assigned to very difficult, high risk positions, and at times set for failure. There would be many things that would happen in organizations, because organizations are social setup, and people try and do so many different things to protect their interests at the cost of others, not only directed towards women or against women in general, but for women, it becomes all the more difficult. So resilience actually helps. Secondly, if you are a very serious and ambitious woman who aspires to leadership position and want to make an impact, because women generally are driven by impact than profile. This is what I read some time ago. And that is quite true, at least I can say for some of us, right? So organizations, to meet those gender specific goals, they do assign female academic with profiles, decorative names, flowery designation, but with no actual substance. In that case, you are there, but then you know within your heart, you know that you are actually not doing anything which is worthwhile. You are holding a decorative ornament. In that case, there would be again a lot of self-doubts. You know, you would doubt yourself, you would doubt the system, you would be filled with lots of self-doubts, and that's again, resilience would help you overcoming those self-doubts, you know, navigating your way through many systemic hurdles in the organization. You know, so that's one thing. And lastly, just want to quickly reflect on one thing, you know, though people, my co-panelists have already spoken a lot about ways to address gender inequality or, you know, gender inequality in workplace. There are a couple of things which many organizations do, and higher educations also can experiment with. Number one, they say in management parlance, whatever gets measured gets managed. So it's a good idea to have some gender specific goals, right? Your strategy should be oriented around achieving gender equality. You need to have specific, actionable, measurable objectives and action plans to achieve those objectives. Framework, which would talk about stretch assignments, which would talk about shadowing, which would talk about structured leadership training, which would talk about opportunities to network, which would also let you be a little flexible and also let you break the organizational silence around your very specific issues. So it's important to break the organizational glass ceiling. The organizational silence is broken around very important, sensitive, women-related topics. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Tanushree, and there could not perhaps have been a better way to conclude this session. We are running out of time, but I just want to say a couple of things as a moderator. One is that what an incredible pleasure and a privilege it has been to be listening to all of you. It has been a truly learning experience, and I feel that these conversations are important and we need to have these conversations more often. But I agree completely with Professor Tanushree that there is a rhetorical commitment to gender equality, and equality often I find is a treacherously simple concept. Everybody wants equality, but how to arrive at that equality? What do we mean by that equality? What kind of equality are we talking about? And of course, gender is interspersed with questions of class and caste and race and religion and region, sexual identity, orientation, so many other aspects are deeply interspersed with the idea of gender. So perhaps it requires a nuanced conversation. It requires unpacking the idea of equality itself. And most importantly, it requires, as Professor Tanushree says, to set, actionable, objective, measurable, sort of goals, which we can set, which we can evaluate, so that this journey that we are on, this battle that we are fighting, can be fought in concrete terms. This is not a linear battle. It cannot be fought that, okay, let us first deal with our internal barriers and now let's deal with our external barriers. It's a battle that needs to be fought in many fronts. and therefore perhaps actionable, measurable sort of parameters on each front are required so that this could be taken forward. I'm once again grateful to all of you for sparing your valuable time, coming and partaking in this conversation. Professor Feyiz, Professor Galina, Professor Penny, Professor Tanushree, please accept my heartfelt gratitude and gratitude on behalf of OP Jindal Global University. This has been an incredible session, and I look forward to be in touch, to be interacting with all of you, and to be able to take this conversation forward in concrete terms. Thank you very much, and I hope all of you who have joined us are able to join us for our other sessions as well that will be going on through the day. Thank you once again, and lovely talking to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.